Ladies and gentlemen, analysts and associates, welcome to your Managing Director Secretary's favorite podcast, the Big Swinging Decks Podcast by Litquidity and Moran. This is not financial advice. You'd be a bottom bucket analyst to make investment decisions based on what is discussed on this show.
Welcome back to Big Swinging Decks. This is the second time I'm recording this because I screwed it up the first time. Lit, how we feeling?
Feeling good.
It's been quite the big week, huh? After just 1 week out there, we are the number 5 business podcast, and we cracked the top 100, and we're number 93 overall, which, you know, when we started this, I made the goal of having this be the part of my take of finance, and we just recently surpassed them. So how you feeling?
I mean, yeah, it feels great. And I think, you know, you've got the Jim Cramers of the world and Dave Portnoy podcast. I mean, it's good to be up there and on the business side above them. So let's keep the momentum going. I feel like we've got a lot of good content. We're just getting started and yeah, a lot to come.
Yeah, let's keep it rolling. You know, we couldn't do this without our shareholders. We love you guys. We're open to any and all feedback that you have. This episode, which is going to be on mental health, is something that's very important to us. And so we just wanted to start off saying that this is going to be something that we're going to be the only ones talking in. However, next week, we're going to be starting off with our first guest. It's going to be a very big name that everyone knows and recognizes. So we're excited to bring you guys that. But just wanted to let you know kind of the lay of the land and how this is going to go in the future. One thing I wanted to bring up, though, Lit, is it's been a very big week for you outside of the podcast. Any big things happen?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. That's a good segue into explaining what is going to keep Lit Ventures going and humming for the rest of the year. So if you guys didn't see, but I hope you did see because I blasted it on Instagram, Twitter, and even LinkedIn for the boomers, I recently announced that I'm scouting for Bain Capital Ventures.
Is that a modeling type deal or?
No, it's not a modeling deal. It's not scouting for the next QB to go to Auburn or Alabama, but basically a very similar program where I'm not employed by Bain Capital Ventures. I am essentially helping them identify interesting companies at a very early stage. It's a focus on companies in the pre-seed, seed, Series A type realm. So, I mean, these are typically companies that don't even have revenue, don't even have a functioning product, just starting to potentially think about certain things. So it's like really getting down to the ground floor with them. And let's see, we're also focused on looking at certain verticals, you know, where I tend to have more of my expertise around, which is fintech, e-commerce, creator economy, SaaS, Web3, and DeFi.
I'm a big SaaS guy.
Big SaaS, yeah.
Huge.
You love that recurring revenue.
Love that.
Big TAM, big multiple, and big exit. So, you know, it's exciting because, you know, it's essentially a way to do investing on the side without actually having to commit to a full fund. And also, it allows me to continue doing what I'm doing here. We're building out Litquidity, building out the podcast. Nothing's going to change there. It's just partnership with Bain to help them find companies, and then eventually, you know, they can become the next big fucking unicorn. So, you know, if you're out there, you're a founder, or you work at a company that could potentially benefit from having Lit Capital on the cap table, hit us up. You know where we're at.
Amazing. And so one thing is, when I was listening to the podcast last week, you know, I heard your voice edited slightly. And for me, used to hearing your regular voice, you know, a little surprised. Any commentary on there?
Yeah, some people have been like, well, I didn't expect your voice to be that deep. And I'm like, well, first of all,
your balls finally dropped?
Yeah, I tug them down when I'm recording the podcast. No, so it's actually a pitch shifter that our producer layered on. So it kind of sounds like a Colombian drug lord, if you will.
Yeah, like a ransom note.
Yeah, like a ransom note with, you know, those magazine cutouts, letters. And yeah, I mean, we're trying to make it sound as natural as possible, but it might remind you of someone in the mid 2000s. Mark, do you have any guesses?
Probably not Usher. Maybe the Spice Girls.
No, it's fucking T-Pain.
So now that T-Pain has exited the chat, we'll move into kind of briefing and setting up this mental health discussion, which, look, one of our main missions with this podcast is to be a relatable voice to you guys and to be able to talk about things that people do not normally talk about in finance. Since the pandemic began, we've seen a massive change in how we work, leading to changes in how people view their work. And in no industry has this been more prevalent than in finance and specifically in investment banking. Last year, we broke the Goldman Sachs 13 survey that led to broad sweeping pay raises across the industry. But the industry remains in turmoil as juniors push for more of a work-life balance. As people reevaluate their relationship with work, we see banks putting in various guardrails, protected weekends, et cetera, the usual, to make attempts to improve the lives of junior bankers. And is that something that's really been changed? We're going to talk about that. And one main component of work-life balance that, people talk about wellness, all of these things, but no one really publicly talks about the mental health aspect, which is what we're going to do. This industry has tragically had a lot of incidents recently of people being severely affected by having mental health crises. Recently in December, a 25-year-old private equity associate committed suicide in New York, and there have been countless examples of that, over the past few years.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, if we go back a couple of years, there's a Goldman Sachs analyst out in San Francisco that also, had texted his dad, and he just reached the boiling point. And then even before that, with Bank of America in London, there was an intern there who, also unfortunately passed away on the job, and it's even made its way to industry HBO, right? If you guys watched Hari, I mean that's honestly a reflection on the industry, which shouldn't be the case.
Exactly. And, for both of us having been bankers and going through the grind, we know one of the main components of work-life balance is mental health. And so since no one talks about it really publicly, that's what we're here to do today. For me, I really like to scour Wall Street Oasis. And I've seen a lot of posts recently about people struggling, really, really struggling. And it's time to bring this discussion to the forefront. We recently asked you guys via Instagram story to submit mental health questions for us to discuss. And so in our main section, that's what we're going to do. Before we get into that, though, we just want to say, look, this is something that's very important to the both of us. It's a very complicated and sensitive topic. Like my dad's a military psychologist. My mother was an editor for the American Psychological Association. So I grew up in a very psychology-oriented home. And, Lit and I are going to be speaking from our own experiences with our own biases. So our advice isn't necessarily meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather some guidance for you guys out there, and from people who have been through some of this shit in the bullpen. So we really want to be able to do what we can to help others navigate this. And with that being said, Lit, should we jump into this?
Right before we jump in, I just wanted to also touch upon some of the people out there might be thinking, this is some overly woke stuff that we're going to just be touching upon things. Mental health is a joke and whatever. And no, we're going to actually talk about it in a way that's real. I mean, everyone knows someone who's struggling, who's going through something. So, to those people, it's just give it a listen, right? And you'll see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I know in this, for me recording it, I'm very anxious and nervous because I've never talked about this publicly to people. And so we're putting ourselves out there to hopefully, show people that there's nothing to be ashamed with in opening up and seeking help. And that if you ever need anything, we're here. So without further ado, let's roll into it.
Let's do it.
So recently, we submitted to you guys a Instagram story that asked for questions on mental health that you would like for us to discuss. And so we are going to be doing that, running through the shareholder submitted questions. And first, let's start with something that we touched on earlier. But so, Lit, pay to juniors has obviously been increased in no small part thanks to you. Has that led to any improvements in work-life balance? Has that really changed anything?
Yeah, no, I think that it has not really. The issue with pay, I think, always just comes down to, hey, it's a Band-Aid fix. Obviously, throwing money to a problem can help for the short term, but the problems that I think I saw and also people still see, and we still get this in the DMs all the time, is the people are just still expected to put their lives on the back burner and dedicate their time to rearranging logos, meeting unrealistic deadlines. And I think you can't really throw money at it and expect it to fully go away. You'll probably get people who are willing to do the job at whatever cost, but still, I mean, they're going to realize once they get into the workforce that it could suck. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's like one of the things, right? Is so take your average kid on Wall Street, you know, they're probably close to near perfect all throughout their lives. And then they get here and it's a very stress-inducing job that you're working a lot of hours for, that a lot of people have never been through an experience like that if they haven't been in the military or playing sports or something like that. And it's definitely a shock to a lot of people. And so I think this discussion is something that people want to be like, oh, you're making six figures, shut the fuck up, which isn't the solution. And that's something we're going to talk about, the kind of idea of toxic masculinity and things like that, but in a way that's not overly woke. So I think one of the things too, kind of going off what you're saying, is that there's this whole idea of wellness, that you have corporations sponsoring yoga and things like that, and how that's not really mental health awareness. That's not really doing anything to actually help the problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is like, oh, we hear you, we want you to stay, we want commitment from our junior bankers and loyalty to the firm, all that kind of fucking bullshit. I mean, that's ultimately what it is at the end of the day. And it's like, okay, well, cool. Like, yeah, I'm still getting worked, but hey, I have like the access to a free headspace or calm, you know, the therapy session where it could either be like the little meditation ohms or someone that's guiding you through something. And I think it's like, well, yeah, I wish I had time to do that, but I kind of had to get through this with the MD who's breathing down my neck, asking where we are with the model.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's like there's all these kind of external solutions that HR departments and, you know, higher ups at companies can implement, but really a lot of this comes from a structural issue of, you know, there's not enough people to do the work. Kids are constantly overworked. So you pay people, you know, extra amount of money that's going to have diminishing returns after a certain threshold, to the point that, like, you know, do you really like what you're doing? Is it giving you meaning? Is it giving you value? Are you learning? All these kind of intrinsic things that people want in a job that oftentimes in banking after a certain point goes away. I know that was true with me after like the steep learning curve. You know, you've done it a few times. You can do it in your sleep. It's not the hardest job in the world. It's algebra 2. Maybe. I don't even remember if I took algebra 2. I definitely took algebra 1. I know that, and definitely used that TI-84 to plug in some answers to exams on it. But that's besides the point. You know, and I think so. There's the wellness aspect that doesn't really work because it's not targeting kind of the root of the issue, right? And you have this culture of a lot of people who are now in management roles at companies who are like, okay, you know, oh, I went through this shit. This is the shit you have to do to learn. But we live in a different time now where there's so many different ways to make money. You look at Facebook paying 190K bonuses to retain engineers the other day. It's wild. And, you know, I think it's very fascinating too to read the amount of articles that have come out recently, especially around bonus time, with people questioning how they're making their money in finance when you can be a teenager who's making millions on NFTs or something like that. But I definitely think we live in different times now, right?
Yeah. I mean, the game has changed, and it's not that Wall Street is the career for someone who wants to get rich, right? It's you have Silicon Valley that's promised, to compete with a better work-life balance. I mean, you got like the pantries that are fully stocked. You get unlimited vacation. Mm-hmm. But some of the companies can have a lot of upside if you're granted equity, and so like that's pretty different. And it wasn't as prevalent back in the day. And then, going back to the NFTs and crypto, like you have some people who have no business or no understanding of markets, just YOLOing their funds and making more than a lot of people who went to Wharton and then Goldman Sachs and KKR off of pure YOLO. And you see that on social media. So it's kind of like, well, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of this too is it's like everyone, I know, like I was someone where it's like you do well in school, you try and work as hard as you can, blah, 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 get to this great corporate job because you don't necessarily know what else you want to do. you get there and then it's like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And I guess one of the things that our shareholders had to talk about is imposter syndrome. And so I think that kind of lends itself nicely. And so those of you who don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's essential, and this isn't going to be a definition of it, but it's kind of feeling like you don't belong in a certain situation, which is very prevalent to people in banking, and I know especially in law as well, where you go from, taking out student loans, paying for school, and then working in an environment that's very, very different than anything you've ever known. I know for me, growing up in a military family, working on Wall Street, it was very, very different in the beginning. And so it's kind of like, do I fit in here? How do I deal with this? Do I belong? And so have you ever had any feelings like that, or kind of what are your thoughts on imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I guess I'd say something similar, where I grew up in a middle-class family. I didn't know shit about investment banking until I went to college and ran into a lot of people who were recruiting for it, and I sort of followed the herd. And so learning about that, or just hearing all the stories of like, oh, you have to know an MD, or your dad has to be like a hedge fund manager or something like that, was kind of daunting. But I'd like to say, yeah, I mean, I worked hard and was able to break in. And yeah, I mean, it's something that even when I finally got in there, it's like, I know I can hang with everyone else. It's not the most difficult job in the world, but at the same time, that some people might have a leg up or be a little more advantaged just because of who they know, or their dad's a client or something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, there's something to that imposter syndrome, but I don't think it really ever affected me much, because I was more so just like soaking all in real time and just saying, hey, I'm going to do my job and hope I get, paid a good bonus at the end of the year for, doing the job well.
Yeah, no. So kind of funny. I'm thinking back to when I first had I did 2 internships at Credit Suisse. And so my first one, I remember my mom gave me $200 for ties before I started. So I spent all 200 of those dollars on one Hermes tie, because I thought that's what bankers wear. That's what they do. And so I show up and I'm wearing the same tie as the managing director, who was head of the healthcare group at Credit Suisse, which is kind of a funny memory. But for me, like, one thing that always stuck out to me is there's this guy, John Marshall, he was the longest serving Supreme Court justice, a little bit of a history lesson. And he was cousins with Thomas Jefferson growing up, and he grew up super poor, but because of this like family dispute they had, basically Jefferson grew up, like a little prince, and then he grew up a few miles away in like a 2-bedroom dirt floor shack with like 8 brothers and sisters. But he always said that reality follows appearance. And that was something I always ascribed to when I first started on Wall Street, because I always thought, okay, you got to have a very nice suit. You have to have your Gucci loafers. You have to have your Hermes tie. And that's what's going to make you fit in. And it was a realization that I came to over a while of working in banking, that it's like some of the people that go into banking, it's like they have no concept of who they are as individuals, that it's like you're just basically trying to be this stereotype or idea of someone that you think fits something. And I think that when you think about this industry, has some of the worst managers of any industry, because you're never taught how to lead. You're never really punished for not having empathy, which you are in other industries. You're never kind of doing these basic processes that you can kind of learn how to motivate people and to understand juniors and to help them grow, which in turn helps you perform better, but which I think is just a very interesting aspect of it. But the management thing aside, So one of the things that we got a lot of shareholder submitted questions on, that I think is very prevalent on Wall Street Oasis, or whenever anyone working in finance is complaining, is why the fuck are you complaining? If you don't want the job, someone else will take your 6-figure salary. How do you reply to that, Lit?
I mean, I'll say, yeah, sure. Like, go ahead and take it, and then get back to me in a few months when you realize that, sure, you got the money, you got the job, and still sucks. And you can't just overcome that it fucking sucks. I mean, yeah, you can put it, in the back of your head and try to ignore it, but you're not going to ignore it when you're sleep deprived and you realize that, hey, what the fuck? Like, I'm dealing with some bullshit MD or some crazy client or a VP who's trying to show off. And most of the people that say that are the ones that actually have never worked in the industry. Yeah. And then there are other people that, they're the ones that just bend over and take it. And I mean, why shouldn't you be able to express it, it's a common sentiment. So why not just fucking talk about it a little more openly?
Yeah, I mean, like, and you see responses all the time to people like, "Oh, just quit." It's like that's not fucking helpful. Number one, or like, stop complaining, not helpful. And I think a lot of it is like you're saying, people who haven't worked in the industry who really know what it's like. Is you get someone who's been actually like at a top institution for a little bit, they're going to know the pressures it puts on you because it's like a wild experience. I mean, I know for me, like it wasn't necessarily like we're saying the work's not hard. It's relatively actually pretty easy when you think about it, that you're paid essentially six figures, a lot of money. That's more than most people, will make. And you're just sitting there on a fucking computer. Maybe you're socially awkward, talking to a client or something. It's like, it's not kind of rocket science. But one of the things I think that's really interesting is the concept of like toxic masculinity is something that I think is very prevalent. This idea that everyone should act a certain way, you shouldn't complain, you shouldn't whatever. And the individuals that like I worked with that I thought, really ascribed to that mentality the most were the ones who were the most unhappy. I remember there was a day, this was probably like November, December of like 2020. And so like I was kind of okay. I mean, this is part of having a podcast. We got to be vulnerable. So here we go. Okay. But so like I was going through a pretty rough period in my time where I'd broken up with a girl I was dating for 2.5 years. And I was starting to like, I had always told myself, like, I'd give myself 3 years in banking, get to where like I knew I was going to be promoted and then really kind of figure out what was next. And I was like, what the fuck is next? And I go into work because I'm living by myself. I wanted some human interaction. And so like there were 2 people on the floor that day. Normally, I don't know, there's probably like 30 people or so on the floor. And so there's 2 people aside from me. And I looked around and it's like those 2 people both made, I mean, at Centerview, you're getting paid as a partner a percentage of the deal fees that you have. So like God knows how much they made, but definitely over 8 figures in the past few years. And so I remember looking at them and being like, the only reason they're here at work are because they either hate being home or their wives hate them. And that's kind of the path I'm going down. And it's like, this isn't what I want to be doing. And a lot of that was because I felt like you kind of lose control sometimes when you're in a client services job. It's very demanding and, you really don't have control over your schedule because like we're saying, sometimes it's not the volume of work. It's the fact that you are always on someone else's time that, it's like you can't run to the gym without bringing your laptop, or you can't go to brunch with your friends on a Sunday without bringing your laptop in case you get an urgent email because everything's urgent. And it's always, to me, I feel like one of kind of the critical points on any deal that's going to dictate for the analyst and associate how it's going to go is how the VP or how the principal is. And are they like an empathetic person? Are they someone who's understanding, who can deal with the higher up MD and kind of help scale the workflow? Or are they someone who, which is unfortunately usually the case, someone who's always just going to fire shit down the tube, not review stuff until the last minute and really fuck your life up with work, huh?
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, I mean, when you're talking about empathetic versus whatever, like, just to relate that to the fucking hardos out there who's like, oh, empathy, that's for pussies. It's like, all right, no, let's take it into is he a chill guy or she a chill, woman, or a fucking hard ass? Like, that's not a matter of being a pussy or not. It's just like, would you rather work with someone who's chill or someone who's not? And like, if you put it in that way, it's like, all right, I guess, I will want to work with someone who's chill and gets it and more understanding. So if you frame it in that way, it's not, this whole overly woke bullshit.
And I mean, I kind of do that because, like, number one, I would challenge anyone to like question my credentials or what I've done or whatever. And so like the whole idea of like being a hardo and whatever, it's like, dude, we're not like, 12 years old or like in our, freshman fraternity thinking we're going to go to Wall Street or whatever. Like, I think one of the interesting experiences that I had kind of from that time period I was talking about in like 2020 over more into now was to really kind of like taking a step back at times and like thinking about my own mental health, because I was someone where it's always like, okay, I'm going to get to next bonus season and then everything's going to be good. I'll figure it out. And it's this kind of constant gradually winding up roller coaster up to bonus season, and then you restart everything a year again, kind of back where you were. And so having been an athlete, I never really looked at mental health as like, the same necessity as your physical health. And I think it was something that like, I know having been very stressed at work at times and stuff, like it all accumulates. You basically compartmentalize a lot of stuff, and you become less able to discuss it with other people in your lives and like, let alone explain it. And it's slowly taking a toll on a bunch of other things. And so one of the most helpful things that I did was, so like my whole life, having grown up with a psychologist dad, never seen a therapist or talked to anyone. So I finally did that in 2020. And that was like one of the most helpful things that I would do. And one of the questions that we had is, how do you kind of carve out time in your schedule to see someone? And so I went for a period like every Tuesday morning at like 8 to 9. And then I started going like bi-monthly. Bi-monthly is the right term, I think. But I started doing that, and it basically was a great way to start the day, but I would always block it off on my calendar. If I knew we had a call, maybe it was like a 9:15 call or something that I might be a little bit late to, I would just say that I had a dentist appointment and lie. But it was something that I wasn't going to bring up with the people above me, but I also knew that if needed to be, like I would find a way out of it. So I always thought first thing in the morning is going to be the best way to be able to do that. So it's going to have as little effect on your day as possible, rather than like sometime midday or trying to plan at night, and you never know what's going to happen. But that was something for me where it's just like talking to someone was something that really helped me mentally, that I think allowed me to be where I am today right now. Because it was something, it's obviously very hard to do, but once you find someone you're comfortable with and you can open up and just talk about, these issues that you wouldn't want to really like burden your friends with, or your significant other, or your family or something, because maybe the people in your life don't understand. It's a great way to really kind of look at yourself differently and learn a lot about yourself, that I think like having been in school till I was 26, you have a lot of free time and nothing's really that stressful, then you're kind of forced into an environment where you stop to grow and develop as a person. And so I think that was one of the most beneficial things for me in talking to someone. And what was always funny to me, because like I had this attitude as well. It's like, I don't need a therapist. Like, I'm not crazy. And when you think about like,
I just wanted to cut into that, because this is all good and it warms my heart. And I just couldn't stop thinking about, since I haven't spoken to anyone, there's this meme format of, the men will do something instead of going to therapy. So it's like, I think this podcast is what we're doing instead of going to therapy.
Yeah. But this is therapy for men and our female listeners too. But yeah, no, I love that meme. It's so, God, that hits every time. But I think it's like this unique thing to like bankers in New York, right? Where it's like, you think you're the next Patrick Bateman. When you have free time, you're going out, you're binge drinking, getting obliterated drunk. Maybe you're doing drugs on the weekends, and like it's just like not a healthy thing. And you kind of get to a point after doing it for a few years where you're like, what the fuck have I been up to the past few years of my life? Like, I have little to no patience for people. To use your favorite words, empathetic, like have little empathy. If we're gonna be woke, I'll be the woke one here. And like, I remember just like thinking about myself, I was like, I don't know if I'm like the best person in the world. And being able to just like say that to a therapist and then like kind of talk about it. And it's like, well, why do you think that? And it's like, well, I don't know. I view what I'm doing as more important than what everyone else is doing. And I don't have like patience to listen to other people who aren't, working in finance, talk about stuff sometimes. And it's just like, it really allows you to kind of take a step back, which I think was super. Yeah. Right. No, but like I did that. I lived that and, ascribe to the cultures that your memes speak to sometimes. But it's like, we make the memes, you make the memes because it's funny, not because it's true. Because like, that's not how to be successful. And I think anyone who's worked in finance, like some of the most successful people are the ones that least fit the stereotype, that are the nicest, the kindest, like the best banker that I ever worked for was this woman. Try not to give away too many details, but she was the most empathetic. I remember she sat me and this analyst down at like 7:00 at night, and we walked through like her viewpoints on how to craft the perfect pitch. And it was the most helpful experience I've ever had, that I was so thankful for, because I learned so much about a senior banker's thought process that made me always want to work harder for her. That I think that's like a huge thing too. By treating people below you, they want to work harder for you. But there's so many different ways to kind of approach how to be a good leader and all that, including its effects on juniors' mental health. But that all being said, actually, I think it's time for another question on the junior staffing model. So we talked a little bit about the pay raises, which we both agree hasn't worked. But do you think it's possible to rework the junior staffing model, Lit?
I mean, that's going to be a pretty industry-wide change to make
How
that
much
work.
time do we have?
What? I'm done talking about this.
That was a joke.
Okay, well,
that's fine.
Yeah,
like 33% of my jokes hit.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to bash you on that one. I don't want to hurt your feelings. So, well, you know,
and my feelings get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because like banking has become a very commoditized thing where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe this one team is gonna try to restaff the model and maybe take the weekends off or whatever, but then you're gonna have like that a boutique or middle market bank that's trying to steal some market share, saying, all right, fuck that, like let's pounce on this. And like, you know, it's capitalism at its finest. But I think it's, you know, possible to maybe not rework that as much, because that's going to be tough. But maybe, hey, like hire one or two other analysts. And you know, it's like, obviously you get to a point where there's too many cooks in the kitchen. You can't have like 3 analysts in a model at the same time, but try to like get a little more resources and minimize the bullshit work that gets thrown out and be more efficient. And I think that really could change things. But I mean, you know, I'm a pessimist. I really don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with this question because, like, to me, I hated working at Lazard. I absolutely hated every second of it because I had so many fucking people above me reviewing everything that it's like me and one of my former analysts, like we still joke about the time where it's like I went to like a top 10 law school and I'm sending out calendar invites for a hotel in Germany somewhere. It's like, that's my value add. And it's just like, makes you question. But, you know, I think there's this contrast, right? Because if a team's too big, you're not getting enough experience like I felt at Lazard. Then you go to a place like Centerview, where what I loved about Centerview the most is that the teams were so lean, you'd really get to kind of play up a level, if not 2. Sometimes, like, you know, you're doing the job of a much more senior person. So you learn a lot more, you're more involved in the process. And overall, it's just better and more fun for a lot of reasons. But you're working more and the stuff you're doing has more importance. And so it's kind of this contrast of like, do we hire more people to ease the workflow and then have, like you're saying, more cooks in the kitchen? And it's just one of these things where it's a process-driven industry that everything kind of has to go up the ladder. And obviously, when you have a lot of people who most of the time think they're the smartest person in the room, it definitely, you know, makes it tough to kind of find the right balance, which who knows if we're close to as an industry. But I mean, so far, like, I think what we're saying is hire a few more people, that the stuff that you're doing in the office, you know, this wellness stuff is all fine and cool, but it really has to be meaningful. And I think the biggest part of it is like having real dialogues with people. Like, I remember there was this VP that I worked for. He was just a dick of a human being, absolutely fucking miserable guy. And
there's no way you can trace it back to him because there are thousands of dick VPs across the street.
That's like the role, though. Like the VP role, like it's just like the worst managers ever, and they're still learning how to figure out what they're doing. And they're having been, you know, analysts and associates for 3 to 6 years, so it's like they're not trained to be leaders yet, and they haven't learned that. So it's like that's like the worst level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to be the analyst's favorite associate and treat them well, do, you know, more work than was needed, be more helpful than was needed. And I think that's something that like definitely helped in reviews and all that. But I think it was, you know, just generally good training that some banks, you know, really focus on that and make that like a key tenet on how juniors are treated. And I think that that's one, like, I know for Centerview, that's like a huge focus. And that's something that also made it so all of the people.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to cut in on that one where you're saying, you know, like, you wanted to be the analyst favorite. And I think it's like, do some people really wake up in the morning and say, I want to fucking have my entire junior team hate me? Because there are some people that just like operate with the like, all right, these are disposable pawns and, you know, I'm going to like drive them down to the ground every day, but it's going to impress the MD. And it's like, that's not a good way to go about it. And that actually reminds me of a VP who's now an MD now, actually, that we fucking trashed, like unanimously trashed in the junior, upwards review or whatever. And it was like, this guy's a fucking dick. He's terrible to work with, just creates unnecessary work, false timelines, you name it. And it was like, HR was like, wow, this guy sounds terrible. And then the year after, he got promoted and he had like the best, whatever. Everyone's like, damn, all right, well, that I think sends a message of like, yeah. So it's pretty funny, but I don't know what gets into someone to do that, but if it works, it works. And maybe that's something. It's like, banks are prioritizing the profit over, people who are complaining and going to leave, and stick to that. But don't get that bullshit of like, hey, we want our juniors to stay and value the firm. We care about this. So, I mean, like,
that's a great point. Ways. Like it's like, look, if you want people to stay, then really incorporate feedback from juniors to have significant weighting in the review and the bonus process, so that someone really learns that if they're treating people like shit, that it's going to impact them. Like, as banks continue to promote just douchebags, then they're going to continue to have these problems. And like, I think when someone acts like that to another, like a lot of that is a reflection of self and their own insecurities and probably a little bit of self-hatred. But it's like, it's something that I think never is going to win in the long term. Obviously, like it does in the financial industry sometimes, and people are rewarded for that. But I feel like now that we're saying that, that's a huge component, that by increasing the importance of juniors' feedback and reviews, that's a way that there can actually be some meaningful change to really kind of make it so that people learn a lesson through being punished by not having as big of a bonus as they would have otherwise, that you can't treat people like that. And
well, and I think what has been helpful from that is social media and people sending out to me and all the other finance meme pages out there, where it might have been PJT or Molis, or I forget who, but it was like a VP who sent like the most hardo email I can imagine of like,
the
hey
Molis
guys,
one, right?
I don't want to pin it on anyone, but like it was sort of, it was in the vein of like, hey guys, like, I'm personally working 100 plus hours a week as a VP. I'm like expecting you guys to put in 120%. It's like, I know everyone's tired and you're spending time eating food. Like, don't spend an hour eating food. Like, you should be eating it while doing work. And it's like, if you put that over email these days and just come across as a fucking dick, it's going to get sent in. And I mean, I don't mean to blast them when it's just to tear someone down, but it is funny content, and they kind of deserve it. But it's more so on an anonymous basis, just to show like, hey, like, don't be this fucking guy. And hopefully that changes things. It puts them on blast, and people are like, all right, yeah, we don't want to be that guy. So
yeah, I mean, it's moving in the right direction. I think that's like part of our job here, that when that shit happens, send it in and we'll make public examples of people. Like, I'm a big believer in justice, and I love it when people have to pay for wrongs that they've done. And so we're going to continue to do that. There's a reason why a lot of the banks are very hesitant to ever interact with us, which I totally understand on their end. But it's something that, like, we're here for you guys. What are they going to do to us? Nothing.
Yeah, one of them is your old employer, Lazard, who put me in the fucking the compliance training thing, saying do not send any or do not talk to Litquidity. They had Dr. Fauci on there. They had,
and it's just basic fucking psychology. If you tell kids not to do something, they're gonna fucking do it. How stupid are people? Like, it's just wild. There's a whole fucking book I have over on speaking. This is actually a great Lazard story. So there's this book that was written about Lazard and called the Last Tycoons, and it's great read. I would do the audiobook because it's kind of long, but one of my favorite stories of it was they used to have this book for MDs' addresses up until the mid 90s, and it would have the home address, and then it would have the hotel address for wherever their mistress was, so you'd know where to send the book to. But yeah, no, like Lazard compliance, like grow fucking up. Like that's basically telling kids to send us that. Come on.
Yeah, which they did. And so,
of course.
Yeah. So should we move on to one of these other questions?
Yeah.
I think this one's personally best for you, which is One about how do you find time to work out while you're working late and getting no sleep?
Yeah. So for me, I always made working out a priority. There were definitely like I kind of would approach it that I was going to wake up at 6 and then I'd work out and by 7:30 be done showering, ready to go into work because I usually like to be the first person there. And that's because my dad wakes up at 3:30. But so what that would do is mean like I'd be fucking fading, by 10 or 11. And so oftentimes it was something you got to get in on the weekends, you got to get in the morning. Like I know it's kind of common for analysts, especially second year analysts, to go middle of the day when there's some downtime in the afternoon, kind of after the first iteration of comments are done on something.
That would be, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, having been an associate wasn't something that like I really felt I could do in the beginning. But I think it's one of these things that you really have to make a priority, that you're sitting in, still for 18 hours a day, not doing anything else. That I would always, my thought process, which isn't the healthiest one, was just to sacrifice sleep. Hardo answer, I know, as you're about to say, but it was
Wall
something
Street
that
doesn't sleep, bro.
Yeah, Wall Street doesn't sleep. It's like, yeah, well, I'm fucking missing commas and periods in email and have no critical thinking ability, but hey, I'm awake and I look good. So, it's one of those things. Debatable at best. But, look, I think it's something that everyone has their own kind of views of physical fitness, what they want to do. But I think you got to get it in a few times a week, whether that's just taking a break to go on a walk or something. But like, you're not going to be able to mentally perform without also having your body there as well, is my viewpoint. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I am definitely not a morning person, so that's why I would always slip out in the middle of the day. I actually had to get a membership for the closest Equinox just so I can try to slip out, which I think was good for the convenience, but bad because who else is going to be going to an Equinox next to a firm in the middle of the day? Probably my coworkers. So
Yeah.
it was living life dangerously. But hey, I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like I finished my work. I'm waiting on them. And if they're the ones that are at the gym, it's like, well, it's one of those Spider-Man pointing at themselves memes.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I'd say whenever I could slip out, I would. Maybe not in the middle of the day, but more so like around 5-6 p.m. when the MDs or directors were out, and it's like, all right, I'll go there. Things are kind of slowing down. People are starting to order dinner, and then just go then. But yeah, I mean, it's still tough. And I mean, when I was tired as fuck, I was like, I couldn't will myself to go to the gym. Sometimes I'm like, I'm going to bed instead.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I do think that you got to balance both physical and mental health.
So I got a question for you that I think is super important for everyone listening. So the idea of pushing back on something, kind of how did you get comfortable with that in your analyst years? Any advice that you can have, but also how does that affect your mental health? Because I know for me, like I didn't push back at all for like my first year working. Then when I started to, it's amazing. Like you realize all the power that you have. And it's something that I think isn't really it's talked about in theory, but actually doing it, I think is a different thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough when you're a first year analyst and you go in there with this whole mindset of like this hierarchy and the associate and the VP, and everyone's like, oh no, like you got to talk to me first, like, and then they'll relay it to so and so, and then they'll work it up the chain, and it turns into a human centipede kind of thing of like, you're not gonna talk to the MD because he's above you or she's above you, and like you don't want to bother them with your bullshit about you being tired. But I'd say like the best opportunities arose one after I got my first bonus and turned into a second year analyst, and people were like, hey, like you're doing a good job, and the top bucket, not to flex, but it was like, all right, like that gave me a little more confidence to work directly with some people when it was like, oh, this is a quick engagement, the MD doesn't need like a full team, here you're just going to work with them like on a quick little deliverable. And so you get that opportunity to work with them and you set your timeline. And I found that they were kind of like, okay, yeah, sounds good, there's no rush, whatever. But then it's like, whenever you did the same exact thing and you added a layer onto that, that's when the middle whatever person who's trying to prove their worth and their job or whatever, it was just like, well, we need to structure this, we need to do this, I think we need to stay late tonight and bang it out. And I'm like, all right, that's not so like, I would then go back to the MD and just like start to establish the rapport and just like try to say, hey, I'm a human being too. I'm not just like another desk monkey who's fucking like here to do that. Like, I mean, yeah, I still was, but as long as you establish a little bit of like a human element to what you're doing, it's like, all right, they're more understanding,
Yeah, I think for me, I know when I first, after getting a bonus, realized I could push back and felt comfortable doing it, I'd always do it via email, like thinking, oh, this well-constructed email will be helpful. And then you kind of get into more of an argument with someone who they're trying to prove their point as you're trying to prove your point. And it just becomes this time-wasting process. And what I realized the most effective way was just to go to someone's desk without them knowing that you're going to show up there. And, usually if it's a VP, they're going to be sitting around other people. And then you just say, hey, look, I don't think this is the best use of resources or whatever, that you would have said over that initial email. And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be able to think up a logical like retort quick enough. They're not going to be a dick because they're surrounded by other people, and the other people will be impressed that you're doing it too, which I think is a good thing. But then you kind of get a reputation. So if this person knows that they're going to have to deal with you pushing back on them in a manner that could possibly embarrass them in public amongst their peers, then they're not going to give you a hard time, and it's going to get a lot easier. So I think that was something that is obviously easier to say than to do, but having more interactions in person, I think, is a way to deal with that. But that's tough now during COVID, right? Where everything's done over email and people are, now heading back out of the office. But it's something that I think by trying to do more things in person, developing that connection, that's one way to approach it rather than just having little arguments over emails.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found as well was that if you're good and you're like the go-to analyst or whatever, it's like, hey, I want this person staffed on this or whatever, and you are in a situation with one of these fucking dicks who will not like, they're the stereotype of like, you don't want to work with this person. You then are kind of in a position saying, hey, like, I don't want to work with this person, like this fucking sucks, can you staff me with someone else? And if the team's large enough, you will be able to do that. So then that person ends up getting like the worst analyst or someone who also is just an asshole, and then like they become assholes to each other, and then that's a terrible work dynamic. But at least, hey, like the people who aren't assholes are going to be working with the good analysts or other juniors who are not assholes too, and that's what works. And then the others can burn out and duke it out themselves. But I will say that like the biggest takeaway is just fucking do it.
Just do it.
Sack up. Or I don't know what the equivalent would be for our female audience here, but it's
also tougher for women to do that too in a male-dominated environment, and like that's not something we can speak to. Hopefully, we'll be starting a podcast in the future titled "Big Swinging Divas" that will have 2 females who have worked in prominent careers in finance. Maybe that's something coming in the next few months. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to do, right?
Yeah, it's tough to do, and it's definitely daunting for some. Yeah, it feels good.
Oh my God, you become a new person.
And what's the worst thing they can do, besides firing you, which I don't think they would off of you just pushing back once. It's more of like, all right, I see this person like is real and not fucking scared to speak up about what they're going through, and just like do it. I mean,
people are going to push and they're going to try. And this is true, like in any aspect of life, like people try and take every bit from you that they can. And once you realize you don't have to tolerate people's shit, and number one, they're not going to fire you the first time you do this because there's a fucking war of attrition. You'll just get another offer at another bank that's probably slightly better and get paid slightly more. So you don't have to worry about that. But I mean, like mentally, that's like one of the best things that you can do. And then you live a whole new life. It's truly a great feeling once you first do that. Going back to the idea of pushing back, I think one thing that's really helpful is always kind of remove yourself from your current situation and think about it and be like, okay, I'm in my 20s. I'm living in New York. I'm making a good amount of money. I probably have a little bit of a cushion saved. What's the worst that can happen? There's a lot of people living way worse lives out there. And by being able to be like, look, I'm getting bullied by like some guy with a receding hairline, or he's bald and he's miserable with his own life. Like, fuck that guy. And then once you kind of just like remove all your emotions from it, you're like, am I really taking shit for this? Am I doing this thing that I think, like, I always thought if you're going to say to your buddy next to you that this is stupid, you should be able to say it to the person who's making you do it. And I think if it's not just general complaining, if there's actual like logic to it, go confront them about it and see how it goes. And like, honestly, I'm in my head right now, like struggling with the idea of just saying that, because I know for us, not being current bankers, but having been former bankers, people can just be like, oh yeah, I'm sure they never did that. I'm sure it's like, I mean, we both definitely did. Knowing what I know about you, like, I think there's two approaches here. One, you're going to be the best analyst, and then you get what you want, right? And I think that was your approach. And then for me, not having been an analyst, like, I knew I was never going to have the technical abilities that I would have had I been an analyst for 2 years. So I always made sure that everyone knew that I would be one of, if not the hardest working people there. And I think that's a different approach that can help a lot of people too, where it's like, if there's work that needs to be done, you're going to be there. Like the shit with, especially like all the shit that you give post MBA associates, what I think is totally valid, because you don't know how to manage people. The big thing about that though is that these guys and sometimes women too, they don't know how to like be in the trenches with someone. And so for me, like as a post MBA associate, like I'm never going to give someone work and then be like, all right, I'm out. Like you got to be there with them, because whether or not like you're actually helping, like when I was first starting at Lazard as an associate, like staffed with some analysts in my first 6 months who knew way more than, what I was doing, like you got to sit with them and like learn from them. And I think there's a humility involved in a lot of roles in banking that you can always learn from someone more junior than yourself in many different ways about many different things. But I think that's part of this kind of like team dynamic thing that if it works great how it's intended to do, but there's so many breakdowns along the way.
Yeah, and I think like just to sort of relate it to the time I spent in private equity, that was like a completely different dynamic. That was like so the team was very small and flat, and like I would be able to talk to the partners and the founders of the fund, and it was like unreal. It's like, okay, you can actually say the things that you wish you could have said to your managing director, push back, or say, hey, like something that was just like, holy fuck, like when I was able to do that, it's like, why is this not the case in investment banking, where you have more team members? The people I was working with at the private equity fund were way better off than an MD that's probably pulling in 1 to 5 mil a year, and it's like why am I being a little bitch to them when I like realized that life could be better? And so I think once you realize that and see like this isn't the only workplace that exists, like this toxic investment banking hierarchical bullshit, like going back to that, you can say, oh fuck, like, all right, maybe if I was back in investment banking, I will then just go and speak my mind and whatever the fuck. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely like people who haven't experienced other types of roles maybe just accept this as that and play within the rules. But yeah.
Great point, Lit. I think something that's in a similar vein that one of our shareholders asked is where to start with a therapist. And so I'll field this one. And I think this is something that, like I alluded to earlier, I was someone who was like, oh, I don't need to talk to someone. Like, I'm good. I'm not crazy, which is debatable by most people's standards these days. But it was something that I just didn't think I needed. And I ended up being at work one day and just like having kind of like this, like almost like a panicky type feeling that I just like hadn't felt. I'm like, man, I feel like one, like just I'm not where I want to be, like personally, professionally. I'm doing the same rearranging of logos. Is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? And just like one of these kind of feelings where you're spiraling a little bit, which like anyone who works in professional services knows, because you're not in control of your life. And so then I like went on What is that health app? The yellow one that you find doctors on? You know what that one?
Oh, ZocDoc. Yeah.
So, I went on ZocDoc and then I found someone. And so I was like, yo, we're talking tomorrow. And so found someone with like availability tomorrow. Ended up seeing her thereafter. But it was just like going in and being able to talk to someone. She was great because her husband worked in finance. So like she totally kind of understood. And I think that's a huge factor, is like finding someone who has experience with people who work in finance, professional services, is married to someone, because they're going to understand what you're going through, because it doesn't sound like something that, you're not fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan or saving the world. Like you're typing on a keyboard and dealing.
You're doing God's work. Remember what Lloyd Blankfein said.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. But there's jobs with more purpose out there. And so it made, like, I know I was like, my dad deals with people with severe PTSD every day. And it's like, I just always felt like complaining, like I can't do that, because like I'm very fortunate for this job. As a side note, I think like you always have to have like approach things in this industry with, kind of a sense and understanding of the fortune that you have, because once you lose it, then you kind of just start taking everything for granted and become miserable. But that's a side point. So for me, I just like started, and then it was something that like the first few times you're kind of uncomfortable, and then you're like, oh, what do I say? Am I being judged? Then you just kind of like let it rip. You get to know the person, they get to know you, and you're literally just talking to someone, and oftentimes they aren't even helping you with tangible things. It's just like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And helping you kind of remove these layers that you build up over time and shit like that. But I think you just do it. Like, honestly, pick a day in the morning, commit to doing it, once a week for a month, and then see where it gets you. And like, everyone's like, oh, do meditation, do all this shit. Like, meditate. I've tried that shit. I don't know how much money I've wasted on those fucking apps, like the Calm app and stuff. Like, that doesn't work for me. But, talking to someone in person on Tuesday mornings, like, that has been very beneficial for me and helped me to be at a point where I'm much happier now and doing something that I think has much more of a purpose. So it's like, just do it. Honestly, that's the best advice that I could give.
Just do it.
Yeah. What's that? Is it ASMR? Like with the little thing where people are like, like with the weird sound effects and whatever. Is that like what you get from Calm or Headspace or whatever?
It was like, oh, we're gonna listen to rain for 30 minutes and do whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I'm distracted after like 60 seconds, so I don't know where this is going. The Equinox meditation stuff in the app was actually kind of cool. I did it for like a few days in a row and then stopped. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, I don't have the attention span to do that. I'm not naturally a calm person, so it didn't work for me. But there's so many different ways that it work for other people. And I think like one thing for me that I didn't connect when talking to someone was that like, I really like to work out. It gives me time to myself and time to think. And that's like therapy in and of itself. And so everyone, like, I know for you, you're a golfer, and it's like everyone has different little hobbies that you
not good
you
at
really,
it though, but yeah.
Yeah, but like, you enjoy it and you feel better after you do it, right? And it's like your kind of time. And I think that's something too, like being able to kind of continue a hobby or two that you've had, or maybe that you want to explore, and just give yourself some time away from your phone for the most part. Like, that's something that really gives you a reset and a rest.
Yeah, I mean, just touching upon that golfing thing. Well, this was when I was already burnt out and sort of was thinking of leaving my job. I was in the middle of a live deal. We were expecting comments on something, and it was like, you know what? I'm still gonna go to this fucking golf course. That was like a trip with my friends, and I definitely should not have gone on that Saturday, but I did it anyways. YOLO. Like I took my laptop. And I was just like pretending, like that I was at home when I should have been at home, like plugged in on the internet. And so I was like, well, fuck that. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And so I made sure that the analyst or like, everyone else was kind of like under the assumption that I was at home. And hey, like, I sort of had to whip out the laptop, and my friends were like, oh, dude, I'm going to send this to Litquidity, with the please fix, which was meta as fuck. But, I got through it just fine. And yeah, it was good. I got the round in and got home and still worked late as fuck, which I would have done had I stayed home. So it's like, sometimes you just got to take some time for yourself.
Yeah, I think to kind of tie a bow on this conversation, in looking at Wall Street Oasis on a lot of these threads on mental health, one comment stuck out to me in particular. And so that is regarding prestige. I'll never forget going to a local towny bar in rural Colorado. I had a good time hanging with locals, but work came up at one point and they laughed at me for working in private equity and said, quote, working nonstop sounds like a job for losers, which stuck with me. And I think that's a great perspective to have.
Yeah, definitely. It's I can't get into this one because that's going to be something I need to pull up right now. But to give you the spark notes, it was something about like a banker who did all these things, made millions, and then retired in Mexico. And then when he
classic, yeah, build the boat, be a fisherman.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
I've heard it in Greece too, but yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, and then like the fisherman, what was it again? So the banker was like retired, and then he goes to this fisherman, and he's like, oh, like like I just retired, I'm worth a couple million, and like whatever. I'm probably butchering this, but the point is, the fisher was like, hey, like I never went through any of that shit that you went through, and now I'm a fisher. We're both fishers, and they were both happy at the end of the day.
Yeah. The story I heard was so like the banker approaches the fisherman and then he's like, yeah, okay, these are great fish, whatever. Have you ever thought about catching more? Then you could take out a loan, you could buy more boats, and you could open up a restaurant, blah, blah, blah. Then you could sell it to a company. And then, the guy does it, but he winds up back to being a fisherman. And so at the end of the day, and like, I think that's something you and I have realized, like we've been very fortunate because we're getting paid more now than we were banking, but it's like money doesn't mean that much after a certain income. And I think that's much higher than the $75,000 that everyone says that happiness survey or whatever does. But it's like, you gotta have a purpose in life. You have to have something that I think is driving you and that I know, a lot of people feel like they don't have. And so one of the pieces of advice that I would give is, and that I still do to this day, is I say like, okay, how would 19-year-old me look at what I'm doing now? And like, I don't know, if 19-year-old me was watching Fuckboy Island, you'd be like, that's pretty sick. But it's something that like when I was doing that in banking, I'd be like, he thinks he's fucking loser. And so that was something that always like helped me kind of tap into, realizing like, okay, I don't have to do this for the rest of my life. It's a great job, but I have different talents and abilities that I think would be helpful. So I think for a lot of people to not kind of lose your sense of self in a job that's stressful, that's kind of where you want to start. So if you're going into working, you really want to always kind of maintain a healthy distance from your job mentally as much as you can, and kind of always remember who you are and who you're raised to be. And I think that's something that's helpful. But kind of tying this out, I think we move into our appendix section. There's different ways to seek help, finding a therapist like I discussed, to going on one of these apps like Talkspace, MoodFit, things like that, where you could easily take a walk around, if you're at Credit Suisse, around Madison Square Park for 15, 20 minutes, talk to someone. There's a lot of different ways to kind of incorporate this, but there's never anything to be ashamed of for talking to anyone. It's something that all high performers do in some capacity, whether it's Tom Brady or whether it's, the CEO of some global bank that you're working for. Like, everyone has people that they talk to that help them. Your mental performance and your mental health is the same thing as your physical for the most part. And it's something that hopefully, look, I've never heard a conversation that was like this. And I think this would be something that I would have liked to have been able to listen to when I was banking. And hopefully the conversation continues to keep going. I know this is a topic we're going to continue to talk about in the future, huh?
Yeah. And then just to end that with what the great Marshawn Lynch once said is, take care of your chicken and protect your mentals. if we can have our producer insert that audio clip at the end, that'll be great.
Thanks, Rad. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks to everyone who tuned into this. We appreciate it. The last thing I'll say, look, you ever going through anything, you don't have anyone else to talk to, feel free to reach out to us. We get a lot of DMs, so just keep replying. But like, we're happy to help in any way to anyone who's gone through some of the stuff that we've gone through. So definitely do it.
Just do it.
Yeah, and on that same point, if there are the MS13, the JPM13, the Lazard 13s out there.
Well, there is an MS13. There is MS-13.
Well, true. Not that one. I'm talking about a different one. But well, even if they're experiencing some mental
this
health
is the
issues.
official podcast of MS-13.
Well, yeah. So send that our way. We'll blast them. We'll hopefully try to get you some more free Pelotons or even higher base that will outpace inflation. So yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Look, I'll say like this though, right? It's a vulnerable time for a lot of these young dudes, you feel me? They don't be taking care of their chicken right, you feel me? So if it was me, or if I had an opportunity to let these young sahibs know something, I say take care of y'all money, African, cause that shit don't last forever. Now, I done been on the other side of retirement, and it's good when you get over there and you can do what you want to. So I tell y'all right now, while y'all in it, take care of y'all bread. So when y'all done, you go ahead and take care of yourself. So while y'all at it right now, take care of y'all bodies, you know what I mean? Don't take care of y'all chicken, you feel me? Don't take care of y'all mentals, cause look, we ain't lasting that long. You know, I had a couple players that I played with that, you know what I mean? They no longer here no more, they no longer. So I mean, you feel me? Start taking care of y'all mentals, y'all bodies, and y'all chicken for when y'all, you know, ready to walk away and be able to do what you want to do. And I appreciate it. Thank y'all.
This has been Big Swinging Decks by Litquidity with your hosts, Lit and Mark Moran. This is a Red Rock Music podcast and is powered by Acast. Our executive producer is Red Yoakum. Our associate producer is Emma Martins. For more, follow us on Instagram at Litquidity and at It's Mark Moran, or visit the official website litquidity.co. So tune in weekly to your Managing Director Secretary's favorite podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.